opportunity to come together as a community of faith and to deepen our knowledge and love of you and your Son, Jesus Christ. We ask for your blessing upon our gathering this morning, Lord God, and renew our hearts, minds, and souls in the eternal mystery that is your creation and love and care and concern for us. We make this prayer through Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. All right, so we're going to move on and we're going to get into commandment number 7. As I was saying at the start, because of our extended explanation last week of thou shalt not murder, commandment number 6, we are going to try, because next week is Palm Sunday, and we'd like to be done today if we could, so we're going to try to cover a lot of ground with commandments 7, 8, 9, and 10. There are 10 commandments, right? Just checking. I've been looking at this stuff so long, my eyes are cross-eyed a little bit. So, you shall not commit adultery. All right, move on to commandment 8. I'm just kidding, by the way. That wasn't a limitation.
Really quick.
Interpreter's commentary says, the law concerned not the dignity of the woman, but the right of her husband or father. And so, how might this, knowing that it regarded not the dignity of the woman, but the right of the husband or father, how might this translate into a deeper understanding of the woman caught in adultery whom Jesus rescued? What happened in that story?
I don't understand that.
Well, let's talk about the story. What happened with the woman caught in adultery? They bring the woman to Jesus, and they're about to stone her, right?
They say, who's without
And
sin?
what is Jesus? What? Sorry, go ahead.
Whoever is without sin, cast the first stone.
Yeah, whoever's without sin, cast the first stone, Jesus says. And they drop the stones, and they walk away as Jesus is writing something in the sand. Lots of speculation about what it was that he was writing. But what Jesus did was gave dignity to the woman. It says the law concerned not the dignity of the woman, but the right of her husband or father. Whether she was guilty or not is not the point here, but that Jesus was able to restore the dignity of the woman in the situation. Does that make sense? Yeah, I thought so. How might this translate into a deeper understanding of Mary's pregnancy and Joseph's reaction to it? There was speculation or concern that Mary had not been visited by the Holy Spirit and thus become with child, but that she was somehow unfaithful and had committed adultery. And so Joseph was going to do what to her? Divorce her quietly. Exactly. And so I think that, when we kind of look at the biblical and historical context of this notion of you shall not commit adultery, we kind of want to investigate and think about those types of things and how those types of things kind of played out in Scripture. We know that Mary did not commit adultery, but on the surface, it appeared that she had. And Joseph, because he was a saintly and goodly man, was not going to prosecute her, but was going to try to help her retain some sense of her own dignity. Right? In marriage, the physical intimacy of the spouses becomes a sign and pledge of spiritual communion. In marriage, the physical intimacy of the spouses becomes a sign and pledge of spiritual communion. We've been talking a lot at church lately about the physical and spiritual aspects that Jesus is inviting us to examine and investigate. And here we're saying that there is physical intimacy, which is also a sign and a pledge of spiritual communion. That marriage in and of itself is a physical and a spiritual reality. Both give themselves definitively and totally to one another. They are no longer two people. From now on, they form one flesh. Adultery is a violation of that unity and of that oneness. St. John Chrysostom suggests that young husbands should say to their wives. Now, maybe as an exercise, men, would you read the following statement with me? Ladies, listen to this with an open heart and see how this might make us envision this. Men, let's read together. I have taken you. Why am I the only one? Men, I have taken you in my arms, and I love you, and I prefer you to my life itself. For the present life is nothing, and my most ardent dream is to spend it with you in such a way that we may be assured of not being separated in the life reserved for us. I place your love above all things, and nothing would be more bitter or painful to me than to be of a different mind than you.
Oh.
Wow. Wow. Allison's not in here, is she? I kind of wish she was, because I'd love to say that to her, and I will. The seventh commandment is oriented towards safeguarding the holiness of marriage. In the Old Testament, there were very severe penalties for those who committed adultery. So the holiness of marriage is paramount here, and that's why it's made its way into the commandments. The prophets, specifically Hosea and Jeremiah, denounce the gravity of adultery. They see it as an image of the sin of idolatry, that it's a worship of something other than God, this act which violates the marital covenant. If this is so, then adultery transcends being only about the physical realm and allows for emotional or spiritual infidelity to be a violation of the seventh commandment as well. Because it's a sin of idolatry, or can be seen as a sin of idolatry, it transcends just a physical violation of the sanctity of marriage, but can also be a spiritual or emotional infidelity as well. In what ways are we witnessing a surge in emotional and spiritual infidelity in marriage in today's culture? Porno, that's right. I didn't exactly put that up, but pornography is one. Movies. I'm thinking more along the lines of Facebook and text messaging and emails and becoming a workaholic, where it's not a necessarily physical violation of the sanctity of marriage, but a spiritual or emotional infidelity in marriage. And we see this, lots of stories about this. You know, people reconnecting with lost loves and things of that nature, where they may not necessarily get together at all. They might live on opposite ends of the country, in fact, but they're sharing themselves in a way that should only be shared with the spouse. Yes, Doris Lynn?
It always talks about women committing adultery. What happens to men who commit adultery?
Well, and that's what, in the first couple of slides, we were talking about the fact that in the ancient times, the whole idea of adultery was the kind of the fault of the woman, if you will. And it was not the whole notion of adultery, or the, how do I want to say it? The law, the commandment, wasn't concerned with retaining the dignity of the woman, but with the rights of the husband or the father of the woman. But Jesus, in the way that he dealt with the woman who was about to be stoned, and with the way Joseph was dealing with Mary when he thought she had been unfaithful to him, demonstrate to us that the women's dignity is to be retained and to be respected, and that adultery does not simply or merely apply to women, but is equally addressed to both men and women. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
I told you we were going to move quickly through this. That's all I have on adultery. I do have to go back, though, because now that Allison is here.
No, she's totally
And
misunderstanding.
Key wasn't here before? The men were supposed to say this out loud to their spouses. I have taken you in my arms, and I love you, and I prefer you to my life itself. For the present life is nothing, and my most ardent dream is to spend it with you in such a way that we may be assured of not being separated in the life reserved for us. I place your love above all things, and nothing would be more bitter or painful to me than to be of a different mind than you. Thank you. No, St. John Chrysostom said that all young men should say that to their brides.
It says young husbands. Yes.
Yeah, young husbands.
Oh,
He's young.
did
You see what I'm dealing with here?
Isn't there something about honoring thy father?
Honor father and mother. What? Commandment number 8. You shall not steal. You shall not steal. The NJBC says the verb ganab, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, which is translated as steal, applies to both property and people. Might this understanding call to mind the story of Joseph and his brothers? That when it talks about stealing, it's talking about stealing and kidnapping, in a sense, is how the word is translated. Joseph, as you remember, is out with his brothers, and his brothers push him in a cistern, and they pretend that he has been eaten by an animal, and they basically forget about him. He goes off to Egypt, and then he becomes the anointed one by Pharaoh, and ascends to a place of great status and stature equal with that of Pharaoh. And so this whole notion of the Ten Commandments coming along may give you, how do I want to say, I didn't sleep well last night. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm having a hard time formulating my thoughts. Remember last week when I said sometimes I come up with these great questions and I put them up there, and then later I'm looking at them and going, what did I mean by that? I don't know. I probably ought to need notes. I probably ought to use notes. But it does call to mind that when we say thou shalt not steal, it's much larger than just stealing. It's bigger than that. The eighth commandment forbids acts or enterprises that for any reason, selfish or ideological. Ideological might be Robin Hood, right? He steals from the rich and gives to the poor. The eighth commandment forbids selfish or ideological, commercial or totalitarian reasons that lead to the enslavement of human beings, to their being bought, sold, and exchanged like merchandise in disregard for their personal dignity. So this whole notion of thou shalt not steal transcends stealing, transcends kidnapping, and kind of gets into this notion of how we use people, how we treat people, how we try to make them work for our own ends, for our own sense of whatever it is that we're trying to do that is inappropriate or improper. Let me see. It is a sin against the dignity of persons and their fundamental rights to reduce them by violence to their productive value or to a source of profit. St. Paul directed a Christian master to treat his Christian slave no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, as a beloved brother, both in the flesh and in the Lord. We have to understand that the context of slavery in the New Testament is not the kind of slavery that we may be talking about in American culture or history. It's a slightly different notion of slavery. But even aside from that, St. Paul is saying we're to treat one another as beloved brothers and sisters in Christ. It is a sin against the dignity of persons and their fundamental rights to reduce them by violence to their productive value or to a source of profit. And so when we treat people for our own ends against their will, or we take advantage of perhaps their predicament. So if, for instance, I were to go and say to someone who is impoverished, they were desperate, they said, oh, Father, I'm afraid they're going to turn off my lights, and I force them by violence or some other means, try to force them into service to me, just so that I can get what I want, regardless of what happens to them, even if I pay them. But if I don't do it with allowing them to retain their dignity, then I'm violating this eighth commandment of thou shalt not steal. In a sense, I am stealing their dignity if I treat them inappropriately. Look at there. Are we stealing the dignity of people in today's world? In some ways we are. Whether it's sweatshops overseas, human trafficking with young people, especially children, forced into prostitution, with trafficking illegal immigrants across the border by saying, hey, if you give me $1,000, I'll get you across the border, and if you only have $100 now, I'll put you in a house in Houston and make you work it off. And then they're trapped, they're enslaved. Yes, Donna?
I was just thinking of coercion in any way.
Yeah.
Take advantage of someone's weakness.
Any kind of coercion or taking advantage of someone's vulnerability robs them of their dignity. And it happens all the time. I mean, there are those who might say, oh, but we're giving these folks a better life on this side of the border. We're not. If we're robbing their dignity and using coercion or forcing them into some form of enslavement. I mean, we see it all the time and we hear about it all the time, that they come here looking for a better life and end up getting trapped in a life worse than the one that they left. Yes, Lynn?
Could you just say abusive, when people are being abusive towards another, no matter what kind of abuse it is?
We could say abusive, regardless of the type of abuse or the motivation behind the abuse, of course. Again, I think when we say, you shall not steal, we think of it, am I stealing this person's dignity? The 8th commandment forbids unjustly taking or keeping the goods of one's neighbor and wronging him in any way with respect to his goods. The commandment forbids theft, that is, usurping another's property against the reasonable will of the owner. Stealing is stealing. We had a conversation before this session started, and I was joking about thou shalt not steal and how easy that is, and the question was raised, is it really that easy? You have a pencil, it's at the office, and you put it in your pocket, and you go to the, and I think there's a difference between accidentally taking something, and then there's something more when we say, well, I'm just making 3 photocopies. I mean, really, what is it? 2 cents a piece to make a photocopy? 8 cents a piece if it's in color? Is it really hurting anybody? Well, it is hurting because stealing is stealing. Does the commandment make a distinction between stealing big things or small things? That's the question. Does it? Does it say, thou shalt not steal big things? Thou shalt not steal things of a value of $50 or more? Or not? And so this is the Lufthansa heist from 1978, which they stole, I don't know, $100 million or something like that. And then you have, you know who this is? Bernie Madoff, right? He had a Ponzi scheme going. Stealing is stealing. And then what if you stole a pack of gum? I had a patient one time who was guilt-ridden on his deathbed when I was a hospice chaplain. He was guilt-ridden because when he was 8 years old, he had stolen a pack of gum from his uncle's store. And it was blocking him from being able to die in peace. The rest of the story is that 2 months after he stole the pack of gum, his uncle closed the store, and as a little boy, he was told the reason his uncle's store was closed was because people were robbing him blind. Here's this little 8-year-old boy who was guilt-ridden and thought he was responsible for his uncle losing his store. Now, as he got older, he kind of rationalized and said, well, I know it wasn't the nickel pack of gum or however much it cost back then that put my uncle's store under. His intellectual ability to reason and rationalize that worked itself out. But as he got closer and closer to the point of death, that emotional reality kicked back in. And he reverted back to a childlike state where the guilt was overwhelming and debilitating in his ability to die peacefully. Yes, ma'am?
And I always think about, when little kids start, like you say, taking small things, and then if they don't get caught, it just kind of snowballs, and they take a little bit more, and then they take a little bit more, and then pretty soon it's almost like an addiction.
Yeah.
They don't understand.
Yeah, people don't start stealing big things, do they? They steal small things and work their way up. Yeah. Yes, Key?
Well, part of the problem we have in this country, and probably every country in the world, is our judicial system treats stealing big things entirely different than stealing little things. And also, if you use a gun to steal $100, you're in more trouble than Bernie Madoff was, because he didn't use a gun.
Right.
And I don't necessarily think that's right.
There seems to be a sense of inequity among the punishments that are doled out for the different types of theft, as you point out. Yes, Donna?
I saw a t-shirt once that said, we cheat the other guy and pass the savings on to you. And it makes, if I am that you in that sentence, I am stealing from someone.
Right. Right? It is the kind of the Robin Hood thing. Robin Hood is not justified. The ends do not justify the means. Robin Hood steals from the rich and gives to the poor. That's still stealing. Yes, Lynn?
Well, and I think too, part of it is we have to also look at our own stinginess, in a sense that if we're not providing for people who don't have, then we're failing part of that job too. For example, meals or shelter.
And that's why the Christian call that Jesus gives us, the Christian mandate to love one another as we love ourselves, is the fulfillment of the Ten Commandments. That there's something more, that we don't just get caught up in the rigidity of the law and say, I'm a good person because I didn't steal. But do I steal a person's dignity if I don't somehow assist them when they are in need? That's hard. As a priest, it's really, really hard. Yes, Doris?
Well, there's another kind of stealing too. You can also steal a person's reputation by slander or gossip.
That's right. Everybody heard that? Doris said you can steal a person's reputation through gossip or slander. Actually, I'm going to get to that. You make my next point. What are some modern issues regarding stealing which are new to our generation? Actually, it's going to be not this one. So like piracy, downloading things that aren't ours. You know, if we say, it's just a song on the internet, it ought to be free. It should be, but it's not. You know, the people who use their creative energies to come up with music or with movies or whatever, they have a right to earn what they earn. And it is not our place to say, oh, well, they're a billionaire, they can afford it. That's not our judgment call. That does not in any way lend itself to justifying our stealing. I remember, I was part of the generation growing up where VCR tapes came out, and you'd always see this FBI warning when you pop the thing in from Blockbuster Video. I mean, I remember the video store at our house before Blockbuster came along. And so this is kind of a modern issue regarding stealing. So it's nothing new, it's the same old stuff. And then we have a cartoon with a pirate. There's a pirate gal saying, "Done any pirating lately, me hearty?" He says, "Arr, me darn CD burners on the blink." Or a young teenager who says, "I'm a big fan, I've downloaded all your music files." And Doris, we are going to get back to your point. It's actually under another section, I think. Commandment number 9. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And that is where we come into stealing a person's reputation and dignity in that way, Doris. Witnessing in judicial proceedings was of crucial importance in a society with inadequate means of crime detection. I love that statement. There was no NCIS, There was no, investigative folks to look at crime. So the prosecution of a crime really was dependent upon the testimony of witnesses and those who had information about the crime. Does this connect with the commandment against taking God's name in vain? Where if we go and we testify, yes, this person did it, and we know that they didn't, and we've sworn on God's name, we said, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Well, then we are taking God's name in vain. I mean, we're in a sense violating more than one commandment, aren't we? This commandment prohibits false evidence, implying perjury, which might damage the status and even the life of a person in the community of God and impair the whole order on which it was founded. We're not to lie about the truth. We're to be people of the light, not people of the darkness. How might this connect with Judas's betrayal? That's kind of a powerful thing to think about, that if we lie, if we testify falsely against another, we are kind of being Judas in their lives, right? So there was a young girl that I had to counsel once who came to me and told me this long, detailed story about going to a friend's house. She was about 13 years old, and she tells me this long story about how the boy next door came over and sexually assaulted her. And we got the police involved. The boy was arrested. It was just a horrible set of circumstances. She had been terribly victimized by this older boy. There were no parents at the house at the time that it happened, so there were no witnesses. It was just this big mess, and I, as best I could as a priest, tried to counsel her and provide her the spiritual support that she needed. Several weeks later, her mom brought her back to see me, and it was in that session that she said that she made the whole story up. Here was a 16-year-old boy who spent the night in jail, in juvenile detention, because of the story that she said that had happened to her. I mean, that's horrible. I mean, that little boy now, wherever he is, and who knows what happened? Who knows what happened? Maybe he forced her to retract her story. I don't know. But when we get into a society and a culture where we twist the truth to our own benefit, we get to a point where we don't know who's telling the truth. And it becomes very painful and very difficult to help people in that instance. The 9th commandment forbids misrepresenting the truth in our relations with others. Giving false testimony in court can cause one's neighbor irreparable damage because an innocent person may be found guilty. But given that truth and fidelity in human relationships is the basis of social life, this commandment prohibits lying, defamation, calumny, and the saying of anything that might detract from a neighbor's dignity.
What is calumny?
That is kind of like a false testimony against someone. I had to look it up. I had to look it up, and I had to hit the little microphone thing to hear how it was pronounced. Oh, I tell you that. Calumny. Calumny.
Our newspaper does this.
Does what?
Before, they'll arrest someone. I'm thinking, I was an educator. They'll arrest like a teacher.
Yeah.
Based on a story from a youth. And even though that may later be proven false, the poor person's already been condemned.
For those of you who couldn't hear what Lynn was saying, that she was acknowledging that even our newspapers, our media does that, where people get tried in the court of public opinion without any evidence or proof before they even have a chance for a fair trial. And then what happens? They go before a jury of their peers who have read all about it in the newspaper and think they know what the truth is, and sometimes have already made up their minds, even though jurors are not supposed to do that.
But there's never any reprint of...
There's never a retraction afterwards that says, oh, wait a minute, we made a mistake.
By the way,
We made a mistake. St. Thomas Aquinas had this to say, people could not live with one another if there were not mutual confidence that they were being truthful to one another. We could not live with one another if there wasn't a mutual confidence among us all that we were being truthful to one another. If we felt like we were being lied to all the time, if we felt like we were being lied to all the time, or if we were always lying, what kind of society then do we create? How do we exist? You go to the store and they scan your items and they say it's $20.38. If you think that person's lying to you about that all the time, and every time you go into the store and they scan it and they say $20.38, you go, really? Really? Can I see the receipt? Can we do that again? Let's do it all over again, because I really think it was $19.38. I mean, how horrible an existence would that be? What would a world of pervasive and consistent, honorable truth look like? Honorable and pervasive truth, consistent. Yeah, it would be nice, wouldn't it? It would be nice. And the reason I put honorable is because I know there was a movie, and I have to confess, I never did see it, a movie with Ricky Gervais, and it was about kind of a society, a world, where everybody told the truth all the time, no matter what. And so there was a scene in one of the clips where he's on a date with a girl, and the waiter comes and says, what can I get for you? And the character says about his date, oh, she'll have the salad because she's looking fat today. I mean, that's not the kind of honorable truth that we're seeking, right? Okay, there's a distinction. There's a distinction between that kind of truth and a consistent and pervasive, honorable truth. What role does silence, either individual or communal, play in bearing false witness in our society? Do you remember Kitty Genovese? Do you remember that? From 1964? The woman in New York who was murdered, and they said there were 37 people who heard her scream for help, and nobody did a thing for her? I mean, a horrible story. There's a new book that just came out about that, and evidently, this murder led to the creation of the 911 call system, the emergency call system. But those who heard her screams for help and did nothing, they, by their action or inaction, implied that she was safe and unharmed. And that's not the truth. They lied about her condition. They lied about what was happening to her through their omission. When we do our confession at church, we talk about the sins, for the things that we have done and the things that we have failed to do, right? That the sin of omission is in some ways bearing false witness when we don't speak up. If we know the truth and we don't speak the truth, then we are violating the 9th commandment. What role do we play in being complicit with false witness being waged by the media, paparazzi, etc.? I mean, all of this stuff is garbage, right? And yet, I'm flipping through the channels, and I stop and I go, oh my God, Hillary Clinton's got brain cancer, right? I saw it in the National Enquirer. Well, I'm sure it's not true, but, well, let me just read it. Let me just, I know it's not true, but still. But if I'm paying money for that kind of thing, and they're generating a profit from it, it gives them no incentive to stop lying or making up things. This group TMZ, look at the slogan, get all the latest gossip. They don't even pretend to call themselves a news organization. But I mean, I know that, 50, 60 years ago, I know that Greta Garbo and those stars, I know that people were interested in their lives then, just as we're interested in our stars now. But the proliferation of the media and the opportunity for people to track others down and follow them and hound them and not allow them to live in peace it's horrible, in my opinion. And I know that we can easily say, well, they get paid lots of money and they know what they're getting into, and that's just the price of fame these days. But I think that when we do those kinds of justifications, we're trying to limit our own liability to bearing false witness. Because, like Lynn was pointing out, how often do we think we know what the truth is, and then it comes out, and then everybody just walks away from it and says, oh, well, we got that wrong. Oh, they weren't violating the don't commit adultery thing. They were working on a script, or, whatever. So we have to be aware of how we might be complicit in some of this garbage that's being thrown about today. I told you we were going to get through these fast today.
I have one quick question.
Yes, please, Brian.
What about it is a lot of if you're talking somebody up for a job promotion or something, is that...
If you're talking somebody up for a job promotion?
If you say that they are a little bit better than what they actually are at their job, or whatever the situation.
Oh, that's an interesting question. What happens if you are not telling the full truth, but it's to benefit someone? It's not to harm them.
A super exaggeration, just something minor.
Yeah. Say, oh yeah, he's always come to work on time. So you're giving a reference to somebody who's got their application in. And they're not notoriously late, but they've been late 3 or 4 times. And you say, yeah, he's always here on time. And you're thinking, well, unless it's a Monday after the Super Bowl, then he's probably late. Well, what do you think about that?
No, it just seems in one way you're trying to help the person to better themselves, better their lives, but on the same side you're, stretching the truth.
We are, and I think that the commandment as it reads, thou shalt not bear false witness. And again, it's just like with Robin Hood. Stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, the ends do not justify the means. And so it is, we may be trying to help someone, but I think it's always best practice to tell the truth. Now, if you're in human resources, if you can be held liable for the things that you say in response to someone, you have to be careful, and HR professionals know how to couch those kinds of things. I don't know if I'm doing a good job of answering your question, but I think that we have to just be consciously aware of what we say, how much we say. We have to guard our speech. There was a slide several weeks ago that we looked at where we have to refer to our speech. We have to look at all of our speech as sacred speech. We don't want to lie. We don't want to hurt people, but we also want to be a people of the truth and the light.
It also depends when you're wanting to Get out of your office, too.
Grove said it depends on whether or not you want the person out of your office, too. Then you might have ulterior motives in which you need to go inside of yourself and say, am I trying to stack the deck in my favor and not in this person's favor? It's a hard question. It's a hard question. So commandment 10, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male or female slave, nor his ox or ass, his boat, nor anything else that belongs to him. Exodus concerns the household with all it contains, including the wife. Deuteronomy, however, puts the wife in a separate category with a distinct verb, a modest but significant advance, I guess, in the theological thinking of the time. Covet denotes inordinate desire. It more likely refers here to practical measures taken to secure the desired object. Allison and I, growing up together, had a religion teacher that told us that to, say, commit adultery is as bad as coveting the neighbor's wife, right? Stealing the boat is as bad as coveting the boat. Or maybe the other way. Coveting the boat is as bad as stealing the boat. So that if you have the desire, if you want it, if you look with envy towards it, then that's just as big a sin as actually doing it, to which we wanted to respond. Then why not just go ahead and commit the first one and steal it, right? And then you've got it. But covet, if we understand it in the proper context, denotes an inordinate desire, an unusual, a strong, an unhealthy, an unholy desire, a desire that is not properly ordered, a desire that consumes our whole existence and our being, a desire that's the only thing I can think about all the time. Oh God, I love that boat. I want that boat. How am I going to get that boat from that guy? That is coveting. That's not the same as, wow, Bob, you've got a great boat. That's a really nice boat. Yes, I'd love to go out with you on the lake. That'd be great. That's not the same thing. It more likely refers here to practical measures taken to secure the desired object. So coveting is thinking about it all the time. How am I going to get that? Let me get a pencil and a paper out. Let me write this down. Let's see. He said he's going to be gone the week of July 4th. He keeps his keys under the mat, and in the drawer in the kitchen is where the keys to the boat are. And I'm going to... You see what I'm saying? That's different, isn't it? Isn't it? Yes. I don't know. I'm a little nervous. I'm afraid you're not with me on this. It forbids coveting the goods of another as the root of theft, robbery, fraud, which the 8th commandment forbids. So, let's say Bernie Madoff, his motivation wasn't just that he wanted to steal money from people through the creation of a Ponzi scheme, but let's say Bernie Madoff had an inordinate desire for living in the Hamptons and having houses all over the world and having his own private jet. And it was that fueled the fire and the flames of his desire to commit fraud in order for him to accomplish that which he wanted. That would be an example of this. Scrooge. Yeah, Scrooge. Or in A Wonderful Life, Mr. Potter. Right? It requires that envy be banished from the human heart. Envy refers to the sadness at the sight of another's goods and the immoderate desire to acquire them for oneself, even unjustly. Envy represents a form of sadness and therefore a refusal of charity. The baptized person should struggle against it by exercising goodwill. So envy, remember we're talking about an inordinate desire when we talk about coveting. Envy is that thing where, your brother-in-law has gotten a promotion and they're leaving their house and they're going into this much bigger house and he got a country club membership with the new promotion and he's doing really well for himself. And you think your brother-in-law's a jerk. And you say, golly, how come I'm a good person? How come he gets all the good stuff and he's a jerk? Envy refers to the sadness at the sight of another's goods and the immoderate desire to acquire them for oneself. Right? That's what envy is, this sadness of, why does he always get it and I never get anything? Okay?
Would that apply apply to even, let's say somebody gets gets a promotion, and then everybody around them tries to drag them back down.
Somebody gets a promotion and everybody tries to drag them back down. I guess that would apply there. That they cannot rejoice in that person's success. They're not happy for them. They're sad for themselves. It's this whole notion of, you cut the pie and you go, oh, my slice is smaller than his slice. Instead of being happy that I got a slice at all I'm focused on is, hey, this isn't fair, he got a bigger slice, right? It's why in our family, when we have one piece of pie left, you tell the kids, all right, you cut and you choose, right? And that's why they get a protractor out and they get the laser cutters and everything, right? The commandment also warns against lust or carnal concupiscence. The struggle against carnal lust involves purifying the heart and practicing temperance.
What does concupiscence mean?
You know, I wish I would have looked that one up too before I got up here. A deep desire, a desire to be with one. This has to do with coveting your neighbor's wife more than the bull. It's the lustful desire to be with someone in an unholy and inappropriate way. Okay? So, we've gone through the 10 Commandments. I can't believe we got the last 4 of them knocked out. What are the 10 Commandments? Can you tell me what they are in order?
Love God.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You shall not have other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself false idols. You shall not use the Lord's name in vain. You shall keep holy the Sabbath. You shall honor your father and mother. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or goods. And for those who are coming to the 10:15 service, we'll say these all over again in about 20 minutes when we begin our service with the Decalogue. And finally, should the 10 Commandments be posted in a public place, like a courthouse? Does it violate our church, separation of church and state mandate in America? We don't even have to talk about it. I take a vote. Who thinks they should be posted in public places? Who thinks they should not? Yeah. It's even. Pretty even, right?
There was a situation where that happened in the last few years where.
Oh, lots of situations, yeah.
They were forced to take it down.
Yep.
It had been there for.
Oklahoma, Alabama, Louisiana. There were quite a few places where they wanted to put the 10 Commandments either in a courtyard out by the courthouse or in the courthouse, and it was already there. Right, it had been there for 100 years or something, and they had to take it down. Yeah. Yeah. Laura.
I think one of the troubles is that they're too long. You look at them and you walk past them and see them. I think it would be better to put them in a place where you can actually read them instead of posting them somewhere.
You think they're too long?
Too long to see as you go by.
Yeah. Let's see, there's another question. What would our world look like if everyone obeyed the 10 Commandments? It would be incredible, wouldn't it? Trying to imagine a world where people honor their mothers and fathers and mothers lived honorably, where people didn't gossip and people didn't bear false witness and people didn't murder and people didn't covet one another's goods and scheme to try to take things away from them and weren't envious or jealous. That world would be a pretty phenomenal and incredible world if everybody obeyed them. The question, though, for us to consider is not that question per se, but rather the most important question. What would our world look like if I obeyed them? It's easy for us to sit in judgment and to talk about TMZ and to talk about all these different organizations and people that are responsible for breaking the 10 Commandments. But the reality is that I'm a broken, wounded, sinful human being too. I'm in need of God's grace and mercy and love and forgiveness. And I violate the 10 Commandments. And I want to not do that. And so what would the world look like if I stopped that? I think it would be a better world. But that's the only thing, the only person I can control is myself. Well, I've got to go get ready for Mass. Thanks everybody for coming. We will not have one next week. We're done. Next week is Palm Sunday. Thank you.